Well, hello everyone. Good morning. It's Ben Sweet from the Anxiety Resolution Method. How are you doing? I hope you're having an excellent day so far today. I'm very, very lucky today. I'm sitting down today with Tim J.P. Collins, and we're going to be discussing a little bit about his background and how he helps people to get done with anxiety in their own lives and go on to kind of live the life of dreams that they're really, really, really wanting. So welcome. So great to have you, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to chat.
Good. So where are you calling in from today?
Today, I am in the middle of England. So for once, my accent matches my location.
Well, we're in Calgary, Alberta here, so we're a little bit farther apart. I understand that you also lived in Canada for a time as well. How long were you here for?
Yeah, so not to give you the very long story, but I was born in Canada, so I've got dual citizenship, and my dad was in the Air Force. But I've been living in Canada for about the last 10 years, both Toronto and Vancouver Island as well. So I'm just back here for the summer, really, to visit people.
Good. I've got some friends that live in Vancouver Island, and they love it. Was that your experience there as well?
Yeah, Vancouver Island is beautiful. It's probably I've been to a variety of places in Canada, and that's probably my favorite part. Yeah,
that's great. Well, listen, why don't we jump in with the stuff that people are really here to kind of hear about? So give us a little bit of a background. How did anxiety kind of enter your life, or was it something that's been there, all throughout your entire life? Were you an anxious child, or it just kind of came in as a result of stress buildup or some specific episodes in your life? Talk to us. Tell us how did that get started?
Yeah. So, I probably have always been a sensitive person. I think maybe it's always been there underlying, if you will. I've always liked helping people. That's always been in my nature, which is probably why I ended up doing why I'm drawn so much to doing what I'm doing today. But I kind of followed a traditional path in life, and I grew up in a family where, mom and dad wanted the best for us, and they kind of pushed us to be successful and to grow. And so I got into a job, and I did the usual things and went for career progression and more money and a bigger house and an extra car and a fancy business title and nice business cards. And I went down that road, and I was good at it. I was good at sales. I was good with people. I was good at selling stuff. And so over about 10 years, I progressed through that industry that I was working in. And I ended up being the vice president of sales for a company.
Oh, great.
And so I kind of as far as my friends were concerned, I kind of arrived. I've made it. I was making more money than I needed, which then makes you buy stuff you don't need. But I kind of had all that going for me. And then I never really questioned anything. And I had this moment in my life where I found myself traveling a lot as a result of getting into that position of seniority. I was traveling a lot. I wasn't really taking care of myself in terms of, my food consumption, the alcohol intake. That just wasn't on my radar because, if you'd asked me at the time, I said, I don't have time to go to the gym and work out. And I kind of felt torn. Like I was like, my wife wanted me to be at home more with the kids, and my boss wanted me to be at work more selling because I was good at it. So I was kind of like dragged between these two different places. Yeah. And the first kind of major incident for me was I'd actually flown from Toronto to London, and I got off the flight. And instead of going back to my hotel room to relax, I went to the pub with my friends and drank a lot. Woke up the next morning, got some coffee, went to an appointment, and I stood on stage in front of these people to do this presentation and basically had a meltdown. That was my first major panic attack. And I thought at the time I was having a heart attack because I had like extreme feelings of vertigo. I kind of had to, felt like I had to sit down immediately. My stomach was all messed up. My head was super tight and I couldn't speak. I had the kind of sensation of my throat swelling closed.
Yes. Yeah.
And I just couldn't get any words out. So I was stood in front of this room full of people looking at me going, what's wrong with him? And I was just like, sorry, and walked out of the room. So that was kind of like the beginning for me of knowing that something was wrong. And I always talk about for a lot of people, anxiety is an indication that you have a lack of alignment somewhere in your life. And my lack of alignment was screaming at me, but I just couldn't see it until I had that huge kind of episode. From then on, that was the beginning of me being highly sensitized, driving to work every day. I'd be panicking that people were going to find out and I was going to lose my job. And then I'd have to sell my house and take my kids out of private school. And all of these things are just rolling through my mind every day. And so I needed to do something about it. And I took medication. I went to see psychologists and nothing worked for me. That traditional approach didn't work for me. And eventually I came across somebody who wasn't an anxiety coach, but they were more of a life coach type person. And they said something to me which kind of struck me at the time. And they kind of said, or I said, am I broken, or is my lifestyle making me anxious? Because I felt like there was just something wrong with me. And their response was, why don't you change your lifestyle, change your situation, and see what happens? And so that was really the beginning for me of kind of almost getting permission from somebody else to do something about it. And so I eventually left my job. I negotiated my way out of my job, started to take an interest in my nutrition, in my health from a fitness point of view. And as importantly as those things, I also started to basically back out of the massive life I built for myself. So I sold the big house I lived in, downsized a lot of stuff, and just simplified. Now I'm a budding minimalist. So I just simplified everything because all of the peripheral stuff was just weighing me down. So that's kind of how I got started, if you will.
Now, fascinating, by the way, fascinating. There's definitely, I have some similarities, and I'm sure that everybody's story, there's definitely some similarities that run through, right? I mean, So now prior to, because to me that sounds like, a full-blown panic attack that you had right on stage.
Oh, yeah.
So prior to that, had you been aware of any growing sense of discontent or feeling overwhelmed, or any sense of, wow, I'm just nervous and anxious? Was there any of that stuff going on for you?
Yeah, I mean, quite frequently, but I almost, I felt like I kind of went right up to the edge and then seemed to pull it off on each occasion. Like I just about struggled through the presentation, or I'd just get through the meeting and I'd be all right and just put it down to normal nerves. So I think that day was like, I just created the perfect storm for the straw to break the camel's back. And as soon as I'd seen the other side, then my neural pathways just went there in a flash every time. As soon as I felt any sensation, I was like, oh, here it comes again. And then I was back to, feeling just as panicked as I did the first time. So yeah, I'd always been sensitive, but I'd always managed to just about keep it under wraps. It was kind of, I liken it to sort of a volcano, and there's still molten lava under the ground, but on that occasion it erupted, and after that it was continued to erupt for a while.
Right. That's a good analogy. I like that one. Now, do you, was it really only a work thing for you? Like, did it just kind of, did that anxiety or that nervousness or that tension, did it seem to just rise up really only in work situations for you?
Once I got it, like once I'd allowed it to come into my life, it showed up everywhere. So it started off being at work, and then, anxiety isn't rational. Anxiety is weird, and there's no rhyme or reason to it a lot of the time. But I could be like sat in front of the TV with my kids on a Saturday morning watching cartoons, and all of a sudden I'd be like, why would I feel anxious now? This is totally irrelevant. It doesn't make any sense. And it'd still be there. So yeah, that's just good old anxiety being strange. And if we create an environment for it to show up, it will do. And so many of the things I know now, I didn't know then. So back then I was ashamed. I was trying to keep it a secret. I was trying to fight it. So everything I was doing was basically fueling it and keeping it alive.
So I did a lot of the same things. I think most people do. They come from that place, and you kind of said that key word of broken, And I remember sitting down with a guy, and he was a psychologist and a hypnotist and all these things, hypnotherapist, I should say. And Same thing. You know, he looks at me and he's like, I need to let you know something. I'm like, what's that? And he's like, you're not broken. And I go, well, I sure feel broken. He's like, but you need to know you're not. He said, you might feel it, but he said, you're not. And he said, I know because I see a lot of broken people. And I was like, okay, fair enough. And so now, when you were, was there any history of that when you were a kid or anything like that? Like, were you a nervous child? Like, I can definitely get the sensitive angle, but I know for me, I mean, I was hyperactive when I was a kid. And but I was also, I had that nervous side as well, where I was easily afraid of things. So it definitely, I guess you could say the roots were in place when I was a kid. I was certainly predisposed to it for sure. And my dad as well. There was a little bit of a history there with my dad, and I saw it in my sister as well. So, you know, is it genetic? Is it a learned behavior? Well, I say if it's genetic, you're kind of screwed. So you might as well take on the belief that it's a learned behavior, because then you can really do something about it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my mum had anxiety to some extent. And so maybe some of that transfers over. But I do believe it's epigenetic. I do believe I think it's environmental. I think we can change it. I think it's got everything to do with lifestyle, nutrition, interpretation. I'm a believer in that, the fact that there isn't a cure for anxiety and that everything is on the table in terms of what makes it better. It's just a holistic approach to improving your life overall. So for some people, if they have a very dysfunctional relationship, then that can cause anxiety. For other people, it's where they live or what they do for work or what food they consume too much of. Like, there's just so many varieties of what can make people more sensitive. So for me, I think it was exacerbated by my work environment, but I'd certainly had the right, platform for it to sort of thrive on. And yeah, I don't know. I always think I kind of believe that people with anxiety kind of have this like extra sensory perception. And I certainly felt that as a child. I always felt like I had a much more awareness of other people than they did in terms of how they were perceived, how I was perceived. I could kind of like be in a conversation and see other things happening at the same time. So I knew there was something there. It's just, until it really kind of stood up and made me change, I didn't really have to think about it. So
now, some people would say, and I find myself agreeing and disagreeing with the statement in many different ways, but some people would say that, although anxiety is not pleasant or a welcome thing or anything like that, once they've gone through it and they've come out the other side, that their life is actually far better than it was prior to. Would you agree with that?
For me, yeah. But to tell somebody who's in the middle of it, people struggle to get their head around it.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a blessing for me because it's allowed me to connect with something where I can actually do meaningful work and help other people. But also it made me wake up is the best way to put it. Like, I didn't have the awareness in my life before that I have now. I had money and wealth and all that kind of stuff, which many people just spend their life chasing after. But it made me realize that wasn't actually what was most important to me. What was most important was time, was space, was having less to have more. And that's not necessarily the same for everybody, but in my own life, it made me realize that there was a whole nother side out there, which I wasn't even aware was possible, because, unless it's something of a massive magnitude to make you stop and take a really hard look, maybe cancer would do the same thing for you. Maybe a very serious health concern would make you change your life. But for me, anxiety did that. I still feel it today. I can still connect with it today. There's still things which make me physically anxious sometimes, but I liken it to the fact that historically my house was built on sand, and with a house built on sand, a strong storm or some adversity would kind of make the house start shaking. And now my fundamental is that my house is built on rocks and steel and strong things. And so, yeah, it might still get windy outside some days, but it doesn't knock my house over. It just, makes me notice it and say, okay, that's interesting, and move on.
Yes. Yeah. Now, when you're helping people, and you're coaching people, and you're
Mhm.
guiding people through the process of using the tools that you've created, that you use to guide them through, and with your course and whatnot. Do you do you come from the standpoint that you are able to completely end it within your life, or do you come from the standpoint that anxiety is something that you kind of minimize and minimize and minimize, but it'll never really get to zero? And I know everyone's different, but I'm just curious about what kind of your general overall feeling is there, because that's a really touchy subject for a lot of people. Because I know there's many doctors out there that will say, if you're an anxious person, you've probably been an anxious person forever. It's never going to go away. This is something you just need to learn to cope with. And I just completely disagree. I've always disagreed with that standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's different answers to that question. I believe absolutely you can overcome it. Whether your definition of overcoming it is never feeling anxious again, I'm not sure that's something I would want. Anxiety for me these days is a kind of barometer of significance. So I know if I'm doing something that's very important, whether it's public speaking or an important interview, sometimes I feel a bit anxious, but I'm present, I care, I'm showing up, and I'm giving it a good effort. If I didn't feel anything about that interaction, then I don't think that would necessarily be a good thing. Yeah, I don't agree with cope with it. I mean, I think that's why people get medication to cope with it. And for a lot of people, that doesn't do anything for them. It doesn't work, and it can make it worse. I like to say, stop coping and start changing, because I think the bigger changes in your life are the things which will shift. And part of my work is getting people to consider what their future would look like without anxiety in it. Because in some cases that's part of the solution. If we're constantly thinking about how we feel at the moment and kind of getting inside our own heads, then that stops us moving forward. So yeah, I think it's kind of a bit of a non-conclusive answer to the question. I don't think there's a cure to anxiety. I don't think you're ever going to take one pill which is going to take it away with no side effects and make you feel brilliant forever. I'm not even sure you'd want that pill, because again, I think anxiety is some kind of early warning system for something in your life that needs balance, or something that needs alignment. So if you can work that out and work with it, in my case, it's allowed me to connect with people better. It's allowed me to improve relationships. It's allowed me to improve my health. So anxiety was massively uncomfortable, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody, and I wouldn't want to go back to the way I was before. But now coming out the other end, it's like, it's been worth it.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. That's a great answer, by the way. I appreciate that. Very caring and thoughtful and comprehensive. And in that, it really kind of, it gives people a good understanding that, where they are can be quite temporary. I often tell people, I'm like, you really have to stop coping with things. I look at it this way. Coping is something that gives you permission to maintain your current state of anxiety. In other words, it doesn't end, it doesn't fix, it doesn't shift and change your perceptions or interpretations of things. And as a result, you still end up seeing yourself as you are. You still end up seeing anxiety in the world as you are. And all you're doing is really just kind of making it through. And for the most part, I liken it to coping equals extending the time frame with which you're going to continue to experience anxiety. And obviously, not super helpful for people that way. And so I often tell people, I'm like, sometimes you really need to, you can't dig a hole with a rake, right? So you have to drop the rake and pick up a shovel to actually be able to dig a hole, right? So if the goal is dig a hole, then let go of the rake, pick up a shovel. And I feel that there's so many people out there that just have the wrong tools, or they've got the wrong guidance, or they've got the wrong information, and they end up wasting a lot of time unnecessarily, as opposed to really getting down to the core of what's truly going on for them. And it sounds like you kind of come from the same standpoint. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I don't think it's anybody's fault. And for people listening to this or watching this, we grow up in a society where we don't have to be uncomfortable. If it's cold outside, we put the heater on. If we're hungry, we go to the store and buy food. We don't struggle anymore. There's no struggle in our life. So if you break your leg, you go to the doctor, they put a cast on it, they put a pin in it, they fix you. If you got a headache, you take a tablet for it, you feel better. So concept of then being overcome with something which has no resolution, because if you go to the doctor and take medication, a lot of the times you still don't feel better. And you, as we said, you get other side effects. So I think that's hard as a concept to get your head around, that there is no easy fix to it. And so people spend a lot of time looking for the easy fix. And there's lots of things out there which suggest they are the easy fix. I'm here to tell you that the easy fix is within you, and the work that you have to do to get to that place of feeling better. And for some people, that might be some exercise. For somebody else, it might be that you're living in the wrong city, doing the wrong job, in the wrong relationship. And there's lots of things to change. Who's to say? But once you start changing them, you can start to see what's right for you and kind of where it makes the difference. And for me, it was, a few things needed tinkering with. And then I kind of got like, oh, this feels good. I wonder how good I can actually feel. And then I just kind of continued to go from there. So.
That's great. That's really good. Now, how long had you been kind of in your acute phase, so to speak? So, kind of the time frame with which you were, from that first panic attack till you got to the place where you're like, well, I'm not going to panic. I'm fine now, or I'm good, or I can re-enter these situations that I may have experienced panic in before, and I'm not going to panic.
Mm-hmm. I was probably like at the height of it for like 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
And then I gradually started undoing it and gradually started feeling much better after I put a lot of the work in to kind of, my first panic attack was standing in front of people doing a presentation. So I was attached to that for a long time. So after starting to do some of the work on myself, I joined Toastmasters and I put myself out there every week. And, this is after I was a vice president of sales, been in business for 15 years. And I'm at this Toastmasters event in this small town in Canada. And these people are like, you're really nervous. And I'm like, yeah. And so I had to, I do believe for a lot of people, for a lot of the situation, that exposure is part of the solution as well.
I agree with that.
If that is something that triggered you that much, then at some point you just got to sit there and feel it. And so, in addition to all the peripheral things that were important to working on it, I did need to get out there and do that work as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. That's really good. Now, one of the key things that I'm just kind of making some notes as we're chatting here, because I'm a consummate learner. So, I often use the word perception as a way that we kind of see things. And I notice that you use the word interpretation. I'm not saying you don't use the word perception as well, but can you kind of give us a little bit of an understanding? Because I get the sense that maybe that's something that's really big in the way that you help people to move themselves beyond anxiety. So the word interpretation, how does that kind of fit with things in the way that you help people?
Yeah, in terms of what angle are we talking here, in terms of how they interpret their anxiety, or?
Well, kind of the whole thing. So, for me, I would say if someone's experiencing anxiety every time they get onto public transit, I would say, well, how are you? What's your perception? Is the perception that you don't have the control? Is it the perception that you're trapped? Is the where is it? All those different things. So I'm just curious to see the way the word interpretation fits in with, kind of your system, the way that you help people. Is that helpful?
Yeah, for sure. So, the first thing I'll say is that in a lot of cases, in my experience working with people, X doesn't mark the spot. So the thing where your anxiety manifests or where it shows up isn't actually the thing that's making you anxious. It's coming from somewhere else, whether it be lifestyle or it's just often, as another analogy, people who are trying to lose weight, it's not because they don't know how to lose weight. It's not because they don't know the right foods to eat or the right exercise to do, or they can't find that information online. It's because they don't actually believe they deserve better. Once they make the mental shift, then the weight comes off and the changes can be permanent.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's the whole yo-yo situation. So anxiety for me, similar. I work with people on in the moment anxiety, I use something in my work called the 3 Cs, which is kind of probably a good thing to explain at this point. So the first C in the 3 C stands for curiosity. One of the things that I've noticed in people who overcome anxiety is that they basically start to interrupt the conversation. So instead of going with the fear and then feeling the sensations and then thinking that something really bad's going to happen, they basically become curious about their situation and say, hang on a minute, I'm feeling a bit lightheaded, or I'm feeling this thing in my knots in my stomach's upside down. I wonder why this is happening. And the reason I get people to do that is because our amygdala, our croc brain, the primal brain, is kicking off these signals saying, oh my God, the sky is falling. And so I want people to engage their prefrontal cortex to say, hang on a minute, are you sure that, are you sure the house is on fire, or maybe somebody just burnt some toast? So it's asking a question.
That's good.
And curiosity allows us to kind of do that pattern interrupt. And this is something I still find myself. If I do feel that physical anxiety, then I can ask the question and I can stay on that safe side and say, well, actually, this is unfounded. It's irrelevant. It's not useful. The second C in the 3 C stands for courage. And courage means that, going back to my uncomfortableness, that there's going to be times where it's uncomfortable, and you just have to get used to hanging out in that uncomfortable space and realizing that it's temporary, realizing that it's going to pass. Another one of my triggers was I'm 6'3" and I've got low blood pressure. So sometimes when I stand up quickly out of bed or off the couch, I get dizzy. And I would used to associate those dizzy spells with panic attacks and anxiety. So now when I do it, I'm kind of a bit of an anxiety junkie now. I go looking for it, but I'll stand up quickly off the couch and I'll feel a little bit dizzy, and I just engage the courage bit, and I just stand there and I'm really present to the feeling. I really feel it. And I do that because something I notice with anxiety sufferers is that we try to avoid the feelings. So a lot of people say, oh, distract yourself, do something else, run away from it. But our minds remember things that we try to avoid. Yeah. So I come with a concept that you should actually embrace your anxiety. When you feel that feeling in your stomach, really follow it and see where it goes and see what it does, and then watch it dissipate and leave. So courage is required to do that because it's not easy and it's bloody uncomfortable, right? Nobody wants to feel like that. But it's the same reason why I take a cold shower every day.
You do too? I do too.
Choice. Yeah. Again, it's not comfortable, but it feels fantastic, and there's lots of other reasons for that. And then the third one, the third C stands for compassion, because anxiety sufferers are fantastic at beating themselves up as failures or as broken or as whatever else is going on. So we start off with curiosity, we move into courage, and we finish with compassion, meaning that it's not your fault. You didn't do this, you didn't start this, you didn't ask for it. And in order to part of the switch again for the long-term recovery is that if anxiety is the manifestation, anxiety is the tip of the iceberg, then under the water is all this other stuff going on. But a big part of it is our courage is diminished, our self-belief is diminished, and therefore as we can kind of cultivate that compassion and cultivate a bit more of that courage, then guess what? The anxiety starts to be less relevant and starts to go away. Yeah. When I had anxiety, I didn't believe in myself. I didn't love myself. And I wouldn't even dare say that. But now that I've done a lot of the work around it, I do think I'm a valuable human being. I do think I deserve to have a good life. And that means that, the anxiety just becomes much less relevant.
Good. Well done. That's fantastic. There's some good depth in that, obviously. That's fantastic. Generally speaking, okay, so what was it for you? One of the other things that you mentioned here was a lack of alignment. So we kind of talked about some general things in your life, but was there one specific thing in your life that you were just like, that's kind of the biggest part of it, that is the fish hook that's, kind of taking me down the anxiety pathway?
Yeah, I think I had a few good ones going on. I've got an analogy for alignment. So I think of, like, in my mind, I think of a car that's been horribly neglected. The tread on the tires is all gone. They're flat. The suspension's shot. And so eventually in a car, the steering wheel starts shaking, right?
Yeah.
And we can make the kind of analogy to us as having anxiety. In a car, you might go and put a fluffy cover on the steering wheel, and then it doesn't shake as much.
Sure.
As humans, we'll take medication, and maybe that helps, and maybe it just covers it up. I don't know. So once we start to fix that alignment, and once we start to invest in the vehicle and take care of the vehicle and ourselves, then the alignment starts to get better. For me, I think it was that I was doing a job which was totally hollow and had no meaning for me. And every day I had to kind of go in there and pretend to be this confident person who loved it and was all about making the money. And inside, I just didn't really care. And that's, some people might say that's a nice problem to have, and maybe it is a privileged problem to have. But for me, after a while, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't function that way anymore, and that kind of going through the motions and continuing to do that. And I could have continued doing that till I was 55 or 60 and retired, and never would have had the experiences I'm having now. But that was probably the biggest piece out of alignment for me. And by virtue of working such long, I used to commute for 3 hours a day. And so I was, the knock-on effect was you're away from home. My diet was terrible. I didn't go to the gym. I had no time for myself. And weekends I spent drinking to cover up my dissatisfaction.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that drinking to cover up your dissatisfaction is something that just doesn't happen anymore. Is that right?
No, it's interesting. Like I was having this conversation with my wife recently, and I was like, drinking used to be my favorite thing. I mean, I'm English. And so like I used to like look forward to Friday night so much, and just having multiple drinks and, getting a bit tipsy or a lot tipsy. And now I don't know whether it's because I've cleaned up my diet so much or whether my life has changed that much, but I'm just not. I do still drink sometimes, but it's not something which I may go a month without drinking and never think about it. And my wife quite astutely pointed out, it's probably because you don't hate your life anymore. And I was kind of trying to numb it. Well, that was my thing to look forward to, but without being in pain and without, needing to numb it, then it's just less relevant to me. And at some point I could see myself stopping drinking altogether, not as a conscious, like I'm going to be teetotal thing, but it's just, I don't know. There's not many times these days where I'm like, oh, I'm going to have a bottle of wine or a vodka or something and really just feel great about it. It's, I don't know. I enjoy feeling good too much to disturb it. Maybe that's why.
Good point. Well said. Well, listen, I feel like I've taken up enough of your time, and what if there was maybe just a couple little things that you could share with the listeners, the viewers today? What are a couple of little things that you would suggest that people do? What do you think?
Yeah. So two things come to mind. First one is that for anxiety sufferers are people pleasers. So we generally will go around trying to make sure everybody else is fine before we consider ourselves. So the first thing I would encourage you to do if you're watching this or listening to this is to start putting yourself first in your own life. If you don't put yourself first, then you'll never be the best husband, wife, mother, boyfriend, whatever you're trying to be. And that means, it means diet, it means exercise, it means time alone, whatever that looks like for you as an individual, you've got to start putting yourself first. That's number one. Number two is kind of like a bit of the old saying of you are the 5 people you spend most time with, a combination of that and something I talked about on the podcast before, which is the hell yes or no concept. So as you're going through your life, look at an engagement, look at an opportunity to do a job or go to an event or meet somebody. And if it's not something you're truly excited and animated about and you really want to do, just say no. And the more of those no's that you pile up, it means you just have more time for the stuff that's really important to you and is really going to move the needle in your life.
Yeah, that's really well said. Really well said. Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to chat with us and share some of this excellent wisdom. I'm going to leave some links down below to your website and ways that people can get a hold of you. And then excellent. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. And thanks again.
Cool. Thanks very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.